Welcome to this tutorial on creating a simple 3D platformer game using Java. In today's session, we will walk through the entire process, from setting up our environment to creating a playable demo. Let's ignite our creativity and dive in. Before we start coding, let's make sure we have everything we need. First, we'll be using the Java Development Kit, JDK. Please download and install the latest version of the JDK from Oracle's website. Also, for game development, we'll use a game engine called JMonkey Engine, which is perfect for 3D game development in Java. Now that we have our JDK installed, let's move on to setting up our development environment. Visit the JMonkey Engine website and download the JMonkey Engine SDK. After the download is complete, follow the installation instructions provided on the site. Once installed, launch the SDK. Great! Our environment is set up. In JMonkey Engine, we can create a new project by navigating to File, New JMonkey Engine Project. Select a basic game template, name your project, and click Finish. This will generate the initial framework for our game. Let's now look into the project structure. In the main source folder, you should see a class named Main. This is where the game logic will be implemented. Open it up, and you'll see a few pre-generated methods like SimpleInitApp and SimpleUpdate. This SimpleInitApp method is called once when the game starts, and it's where we'll set up our game world. Let's start by creating a basic floor for our platformer. We can do this by using a box geometry. Add the following code in SimpleInitApp. We created a green box to serve as our ground. You should see a green square representing the ground when you run your project by clicking on the green arrow in the toolbar. Now, let's make the player character. For simplicity, we will represent the player as a sphere. In the SimpleInitApp method, we can add a sphere to represent our player character. Let's do this right below the ground code we just added. Now we have a blue sphere representing our player. When we run the game, you should see the blue sphere sitting above the green ground. This is a great start. Next, we need to allow our player to move around. To achieve this, we'll capture keyboard input. In our main class, we can set up an input manager to handle user input. We will create a private method called setupKeys. In this method, we will map the keys for movement. Let's add this method and a constant for speed. We have set up our key mappings for left and right movement. Now let's create the corresponding listeners for these actions to move our player. We've created our action listeners that move the player left or right based on keyboard input. Let's call our setupKeys method from inside SimpleInitApp so that the key mappings are active when the game starts. With the input set up, it's time to test our player movement. Run the game and use the left and right arrow keys to move the blue sphere across the green ground. You'll notice that our player is moving. Next, we'll add some obstacles to navigate around. To create obstacles, we will make a few more geometric shapes. For example, a set of red cubes. Let's add this below the player geometry in SimpleInitApp. These red cubes are our obstacles. When you run the game again, you should see these cubes positioned at intervals on the x-axis. Our player can now navigate between them. Next, let's add jumping mechanics so our player can jump over these obstacles. To implement jumping, we will need to keep track of the player's vertical position and apply some gravity. Firstly, let's add a Boolean variable to keep track of whether the player is on the ground or not. Now let's modify the movement listeners to implement jumping logic. We will create a new key mapping for jumping and check if the player is on the ground when pressing the jump key. This new jump mapping will allow the player to jump when they hit the spacebar. The player's Y translation will increase, simulating a jump. Additionally, it sets the isOnGround variable to false to prevent multiple jumps. However, we need a way to bring our player back down to the ground after jumping. We'll add gravity by updating our player's position in the SimpleUpdate method, which gets called every frame. In this update method, we're continuously moving the player downward if they're in the air. We check if they have landed by comparing their Y coordinate and reset the translation accordingly. Now run your game and try jumping over the obstacles. Your player should now be able to jump over the obstacles. This is a great achievement. Now, let's add a scoring mechanism to the game. We will display the score on the screen and increment it whenever the player successfully jumps over an obstacle. First, We will create an integer variable to hold the score and a text object to display it. Let's place this above our SimpleInitApp method. Next, we need to initialize this text in our SimpleInitApp. We will also set its position on the screen and update the score display whenever a jump happens. The above code initializes the score text and attaches it to the GUI node so that it is rendered on the screen. Now, let's increment the score each time the player successfully jumps over an obstacle. To do this, we'll add the score increment logic in our jump listener. Now, whenever a jump is executed, the score will increment and the score displayed on the screen will be updated. Run your game and see how the score increases as you jump. Excellent! You now have a basic 3D platformer where a blue sphere navigates over red cubes while keeping score. However, our game lacks a win condition. Let's implement a simple objective, a finish line that triggers a win message. We can represent our finish line using another geometric shape, say a tall green cylinder. Let's create that in our SimpleInitApp method to have it positioned far into the scene. Next, we will add a collision detection logic to detect when the player reaches the finish line. We will place a simple check in the SimpleUpdate method. With this, whenever the player touches or crosses the x-coordinate of the finish line, a message will be printed in the console celebrating their victory. Run your game again and jump your way to the finish line. Congratulations! You have successfully created a simple 3D platformer game in Java. Today, we've covered setting up our environment, creating a basic game structure, implementing movement and jumping mechanics, and even adding a scoring system and a win condition. Thank you for following along with this tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Java programming tutorials. Happy coding and game developing!